Alright folks, going to go through kind of a first start with Cura. Fair warning, this software gets updated on a regular basis, so if maybe the interface changes a little bit or things don't look exactly the same way as they do in this presentation, don't worry about it. Most of the features stay pretty uniform, and a little tweaks here and there won't make a big difference. So it starts off by saying, hey, welcome to Cura. You want to get started, that's fine. We'll say get started. It gives you a disclaimer, that's fine, and that's fine, we're not too majorly interested in that. And has data selection. You can choose, how your preference is or what you actually are okay with. It is an open source software, and the data is used to improve things that go along. So one of the things that it points out at the very beginning is this, hey, do you want to add a network printer? We're not going to do a network printer with this, and most of you all won't either, so I'm going to select add a non-network printer, and we'll choose something. You can do a lot of different variations of Ultimakers and those kind of things. I'm going to choose one though that we have, we do a lot of work with, the Creality Ender 3. So go down and I'll select the Ender 3 here. Could be a different version, could have the Ender 5s, could do CR10s, all kinds of options here, but I'll slide down and hit Creality and hit next. You can always add more printers along the way depending on what printer you want to use. It's going to say machine settings, and just so you understand what this is the typical setup of the machine. For example, the XY coordinates and size is the size of the build plate, and how high it can build is supposed to be this value. So build shape is rectangular, and these are all the default settings that come with the Ender 3, and they're fine. Heated bed, yes, it does have one. And when it says G-code flavor here, what that essentially means, these are all things you don't have to change, but I'm giving you a brief understanding. The Marlin is a typical format of G-code we're used to. It does say encode, that's fine. It does have some extruder options here. The nozzle is, or the actual filament is 1.75, and we don't want a nozzle offset or anything of that information. So we're okay as it is, and I just say next, and says something, create account, sign in, blah blah blah. Don't need to do that, and here we go. So right off the bat you will see that the interface is pretty simple. There's not a lot of things going on. We've got our typical files, edit views up here at the top, and we've got a right click. If we right click and hold our mouse, we can orbit around. This is obviously the representation of our build plate. It even, if you look in closely, even has like the word Ender there. And a left click doesn't really do anything. Your right click is the one that's going to allow you to orbit. The roller button on your mouse, if you hold it down, allows you to pan, and the roller toward and away allows you to zoom in, zoom out, which is important as we do this kind of work. So right off the bat, pretty easy to work with. I want you to pay attention to where the X, Y, and Z axis point is, or the origin. It's down here in the bottom left hand corner, and that means the representation of the printer should be this way. So this should be the front of the printer if you're looking at it. Not that that makes a whole lot of difference to us. Okay, so far so good. Go ahead and make sure that you're at least this far in your setup, and we'll continue on. Alright, so to kind of get this process going, you need to have something to actually 3D print. So I'm going to need to bring in an STL file that we could actually slice. So in this lesson we provided a file called calibration cube for you to use. You can use any of the STLs you've created previously for this, whatever the case may be. But I'm going to go up to my button right here, which basically is the open a file button or open a folder. And I'm going to go find my calibration cube wherever you may have saved it to your computer. And hit open, and there's the cube. Nice, simple. You'll notice that it places it right in the very center. You can actually click on it with a left click and grab the X and Y axis and relocate it on the build plate. I wouldn't grab the blue one because that's going to raise it off the plate, which is not what we want. We want it placed here. So I declick there. You'll notice all I had to do is click on it, and this little window popped up over here, these features, which this one is for moving, this one is for scaling, this one is for rotating, this one is for mirroring, and this one is for the support blocker. We'll get to that a little bit later. Right now, all we're doing is moving it around. We can do these manually by changing them specifically to values that we like. Although most of the time, we just grab the arrows and slide them down and make sure the Z is set to 0. Okay, so why don't you pause the video and go get a file, load it in, and move it around on your build plate a little bit. Alright, so the next thing we want to do, and this happens a lot, is we have to often rotate these objects. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, push down on my roller, pan it a little bit to the center of the screen, and maybe orbit it a little bit with a right click and hold. And I'm going to click on my tool here. I got to click on the object first, and I'm going to switch it to the rotate button. And this is going to say, you know, do we want to lay it flat? Do we want to rotate this way? What we see here are these green, blue, and reds, where we can click and drag 90 degrees and rotate that way. Or we can click and drag this one, rotate 90 degrees this way. Maybe click and drag, rotate it. I can get to go 90 degrees that way. And I'll typically zoom around to make sure that I am putting it in place that I like. Obviously, I don't want it to print in this direction because this would cause support material to have to be added in. So I'm going to rotate it back around where the top is up. There we are. And we can say reset, which will basically reset it, lay it flat, which lays it flat on whatever surface. And then you can actually, this is a neat feature, you can select it, select a face to align with the build plate. And I don't want it that way, but I can do this one, and it does it that way, which is a handy feature. So go ahead and pause the video, click on your object you have in place, and do some rotations. Just kind of get yourself in a good orientation. Again, you are thinking about how you can minimize the amount of support material necessary to make your object. So in the cube's case, you want basically the opening to be facing up so it doesn't have to print support material to hold up a surface. Go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Alright, now to be fair, that is the majority of some of the work that we do when we are printing objects. And you can see it's pretty straightforward. I can continuously move it around. Sometimes we don't want to reprint it on the center of the build plate every time because that wears out the same spot. So oftentimes when we bring it in, we will relocate to somewhere we haven't printed or somewhere on the build plate we know we have the best adhesion or it's just a good place to print. So moving it around, zooming in, zooming out, right-clicking and holding and orbiting around are crucial to the overall process. So just make sure during this little presentation that you have practiced both of those. You brought a file in. And in fact, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and bring in the file again if you need to. Maybe bring in another one. You can always come back up here and select the calibration cube, and it'll bring in a duplicate right there. You can click on that one and then relocate it as well. All right. So let's bring in 2 or 3 different models and practice moving them around and orbiting them or rotating them on the build plate. And then you can move on to the next one. We'll see you then.